So it's not attack, it's Atack.
You can pronounce it how you want. I'm really not fussy about it. When I was most people say attack because that's the word that
and
we
you
know
take
in
that
English
lightly.
already.
You don't feel that
I don't
it
care.
is.
I don't care.
I mean, it is.
I say Atack. It means so like. It means it's an old English word for like at the oak. So like it was the name of a family in the north of England that lived near an oak tree.
Amazing.
Like way back. So like if you go to the north of England, it's not a common name, but it's not an uncommon name either. Like a few people have it. So that's what it used to mean, at the oak.
Perfect.
And then that somehow got shortened into Atack or attack or whatever you want to say.
But it is with one T, so it is different.
One T, yeah. And the thing about the thing about it is that I get like a lot of people think that it's like a name that I've made up for myself. Like some kind of stage name or something.
Yeah.
And like I've had people know me for like a few months and then they've been like, oh wait, that is your real name. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, oh, I thought you just gave yourself that name. Like, you think I'm the kind of person that would like give myself a name? Like that feels like so self-involved. But so yeah, whatever you want, Atack or attack. I'm not fussy. No one says it right.
No.
Producer at Kerning Cultures, the podcast, and photographer. Yeah.
You're summarizing. There's a lot more than that, I think. No?
Why? What else?
We're going to get to all of it.
Trying to be simple.
We're getting into all of it. But no, it's a lovely, straight to the point. Because a lot of people struggle and they do the intro of like, this is a tough question and it could go in so many ways. But I love the clarity. It means like you've done this a few times in different contexts.
I spend a lot of time trying to figure out, because I'm a freelancer as well. And I do two things that are very different from one another, photography and radio, producing radio documentaries. So I find it hard to explain, like I have like my set of photography clients who hire me to do like editorial or commercial sometimes or documentary photography. But then I have like another side of my work, which is Kerning Cultures or producing radio documentaries for other clients. And so I find it hard to figure out how to bring those two things together because it kind of sounds like if you're good at, like it sounds like, oh, they must just not be good at either of those things if they do both. And I hope I'm good at both, but like when I hear of people who do, like, if they're like, I'm a photographer and a musician, I'm like, oh well, you must be average at both. Like that's the thing I think of in my head. So I spend a lot of time trying to figure out how I present myself to people who are.
It's important because it is a story. Because the minute you tell me that, this is what I'm gonna say about you to myself, to other people. And the simpler the story is, and I have the biggest struggle with this.
Well, you as well. I mean, you do a lot of things. So it's
documentary filmmaker, producer, along editing. For some reason, people think I'm a photographer. I suck at it.
I'm sure you don't.
I never want to be presented as that because I think it's really hard work. But I think that these stories matter, and at the same time, the audience that is listening, we have to have an idea of who they are and what they're interested in.
Well, especially the world we live in, like you need to, like you have to have like people need to be able to know what everything about you from like a bio on Instagram or your website or whatever. And I'm just talking about, not socially, but I mean in terms of professionally, like you need to be able to explain what you do very quickly. And I find that hard, but
it's like the elevator pitch.
The elevator pitch. Yeah, totally. So I do find that hard, but now I just say photographer, radio producer, and people can interpret that.
And we're going to open that up super wide and expand it. So because we have the luxury of doing that within a podcast session. That's why we're into this. Growing up, I'm trying to picture this. It's almost like a classic story when you think of the Gulf or North Africa, specifically Dubai. You think of an expat from England starting a family there. Was that your story? Was it that kind of classical British family in Dubai, or
I think
how did you perceive
so?
That?
I mean, so my I think it's pretty typical. I mean, my dad moved there in 1983 to work for the airport. He worked at Gatwick Airport as a ground on ground staff, like in the control tower or whatever. Or whatever. He did work in the control tower.
It's a very exciting job in 1983.
And so he got this job offer to move to Dubai, and work on the ground staff in Dubai Airport when it was, I guess, the first phase of the airport, 1983.
Yeah.
And then my mum, she was a flight attendant on British Airways flights.
That's crazy early stage. It's not like Dubai 90s where like everyone knows the tower and there's lots of advertising. It's like 83 is
83
like
is like that weird turning point in Dubai history where it was kind of going from, it was kind of just, it was past the point of figuring out, you know, the independence and the like, you know, the going from the Trucial States to the UAE and the Seven Emirates coming together, and it was forming its identity as a place that, you know, I think at that point, I mean, historically this might not be totally accurate, but I think oil had kind of been discovered around Dubai. Like it was much bigger in Abu Dhabi, but in Dubai, I think they kind of realized they had some oil, but not enough to sustain an economy for years to come.
This is telling me very interesting things about your dad. Like he's quite revolutionary and a risk taker,
I don't know.
because it's not like it hasn't happened yet. It's like Dubai is like, it's like what is this place kind of situation.
Well, I think the thing with my dad was he was brought up in a mining town in the north of England called Shirebrook, and his dad was a miner, his granddad was a miner, his brother wasn't a miner but stayed in Shirebrook his whole life.
I'm completely ignorant of UK geography. I should know a lot more, but like is it north?
It's near Mansfield, near Nottingham, sort of in the middle. I call it north because I'm a southerner. But if I spoke to a northerner about it, they'd probably say it's Midlands. So it's sort of up there, mining. It's not
country. By any coast. It's in the middle.
No. It's bang in the middle, near Derby and all of that. And so he was the person in the family who left, and he moved to London when he was sort of young, you know, in his early 20s, and went to college in London. Which was a big deal, you know, like he could have, I mean, this was the time when the mines were kind of, they were changing, and working as a miner wasn't something that would guarantee you a job for life in the same way that it used to be.
Yeah.
And so I guess that wasn't as much of an option for him as it would have been for his dad. So, but still, I mean, I think you know, he sort of was expected to stay in Shirebrook and build his life in the north of England, but he moved down to London, which I think was quite a big deal. And then moving to the Middle East, moving to the UAE was an even bigger deal, I think. So I don't know, like I look at my dad now and he's like, I don't know how to put it. He's I don't see the kind of like the spirit of someone who would pack up and leave the UK and move. You know, he's just a dad to me. Do you know what I mean?
It was a pragmatic thing. You think it's just another job?
Well, I think I don't know. It's hard to tell. He doesn't talk about it. You know, my dad's really hard to penetrate. Like it
is a generational thing. Like
I
think it's a similar story for my dad. Obviously, the context is completely different because my dad comes from a background that's from the suburbs of Tripoli, but it's all farmlands. So his father is a farmer. My grandfather is. You know, uncles and brothers, everyone is a farmer essentially, or does some farming thing, whether it is cattle or growing something. But the lucky sort of batch that he had is my grandfather invested in his education early on. So at that early stage, there were boarding schools, let's say from American style schools, junior high school to high school.
Yeah.
And from there, because he explored a different world, different to them.
In Libya? Or
in Libya.
He went abroad for... Okay.
So throughout it was in Libya, but because of the boarding school was in a different town, like kilometers away in Zawiya, which is, I think, a couple of hours away from where he was living. So he used to board there and come back once a month, once every couple of weeks. That opened a different reality for him, like so vividly. And then because there's a heavy investment in education, lots of scholarships to Europe and the US. He got one of those, and from there his life completely scaled up to a different reality to them.
And did he like still go back a lot and maintain a kind of
solid
link back?
Because back then there was a lot of job opportunities. You go out in the US, you're able to come back and hold a position, and you can scale up. He was an academic, he was teaching, and then he got jobs in foreign investments and back and forth. But his reality was completely different to what's out there. Like it's a similar story to your dad. It's like, you are set to be a miner. You're set to be a farmer because this is what happens in this town.
Yeah.
But you're either by luck or by will or by just completely like, I'm showing up today to see what happens. Your dad ended up in London, which took him to Dubai and back. So in a way, like I feel it doesn't have to be a massive protest. It just has to be like some kind of decision taken that I want to explore something different. You know?
But he wouldn't put it in those terms. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if your dad's the same, but you know, when I ask my dad about his life and his past, like he's just like, yeah, I moved to Dubai. That's it. I'm like, but how did you feel about, or like what was going on in your life, or like how did you like, what was the decision making, and like what were the, it's just like, my mum is the opposite completely. Like my mum will talk for days and days on end about feelings and all of that. My dad, it's so
Have
hard
you done
to,
any stories with your mom?
Not really. I kind of, I have a fear. I don't do stories about my family or people I'm close to, because I've touched on it in the past, and it's too, like, you can't do it. Like, it's too, it creates problems basically. I've done a story about, I worked on a story about like someone I was close to, and it made like a lot of problems between us. Like, I didn't even release it because it was
it creates a certain, I don't have words for it, but I know exactly how
you can't
what
be
you're
you
trying
can't be a journalist or whatever you are. And you can't judge someone's story objectively if you're also involved in it. And that's not to say it can't be done. Plenty of people do it brilliantly. I don't understand. Maybe as I get older, it's something I'll do. But I think doing like really personal stories is fine. But if they involve other people and they're told from your viewpoint, it can make problems.
Good for your own understanding of who you are, your world, as an archive. I used to do that a lot, and the one thing I regret, I wasn't really good with keeping the archive preserved.
You mean like a journal? Or?
I used to have this, silly, what do you call it? A DV cam, like those small Sonys. I set it on a tiny tripod, and I remember every weekend we used to visit my grandfather, and we have this something called mindar, which is very soft mattress, and he had an old Arabic house. I don't know if you're familiar with those in Dubai, probably the old town, where it's basically a square around where the yard is, and then you're standing, you're sipping on tea, you're looking at the sky and the moon, and he's just laying down, talking to me about his day and what happened. And it was at a stage where his memory is there, but the stories repeat, and I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I need to just capture those so vividly. And it's sort of him hustling when the Italians were there, when the Brits came after. Very historical moment, but from the perspective of a person. Wow. Because in history, like,
so you just have like the tripod on the camera and you're filming him.
And we're just chatting. I mean, you can imagine.
Did he imagine that you would do something with it? Was he cool telling stories? And
he knew exactly that I was filming. He didn't bother. Like that generation, like grandfather. Like he wouldn't sit down and watch it again. It's like it's relevant to him, but he knows that it means something to me. So the fact that he used to somehow manage to get sugar to sell it in the black market just so he can maintain some kind of living, and buying farms, dealing with colonialism at that stage. It's really random bursts of stories, but to me it's kind of creates an understanding of where I came from. Well, I think it's like, I mean, I think you're right. Even if you don't do anything with that stuff, like it's so worth doing. Like, I think you never know when, was what I always find with making documentaries and making being a photographer and all of that, is like, you never know when you're going to come back to stuff later down the line. And so I have a ton of, like, I'm working on this project now, a photo essay, it's kind of project, archival thing about the UAE and about when I lived there, and using my family's photo archives and all of that. Your dad's in particular.
Yeah, my dad's in particular, and I'm coming across, like, I'm going back through all of my photos from my years of living there, and I'm finding stuff that I shot that I didn't like mean anything at the time, or I just but now it has, like, years and years down the line, it has like a whole meaning, new meaning. So like things like this with your grandfather, like even if you never do anything with it, or even if it just sits in a drawer, you never know when you can when you can come back to something and it takes on a whole new meaning. Like 10 years down the line, you could listen to those stories and connect dots, you know, in your life or in your family's life that you didn't connect before. I don't know. I think it's worth, I don't think I want to not do it, but I find that there's something hard about publicizing stories about your family, about people you love, because it always comes from one angle. It always comes from your perspective.
Yeah.
And that can be hard when there's emotions and feelings and, you know, like events and things like that you have different memories of. It can be difficult. You know? I mean, it's definitely it's kind of playing with fire a little bit.
It is a huge challenge. I just want to summarize this point with that. But at the same time, and part of the reason we're doing this, we're almost sort of advertising podcast. This is sort of the common denominator between us, among many things. That this particular form, however long it lasts, however long it is going to trend, it does allow multiple layers of understanding that not many forms allow for, like video or social media in itself, or like very constrained small stories written. Because I can hear your voice and I can almost connect with your emotion at that time. You can introduce multiple characters. You can use archival material, and you can give it multiple options of how people could digest it. It's still complex, but at the same time, it is much more rich in its sort of focus towards understanding what happened or how people feel about something than something flatter, which is you know, video or written form or like very summarized content pieces that people digest every day, you know.
I think audio has like there's like some kind of weird intrinsic understanding that we have as people, I think, with audio, where like to me it feels sometimes like video can give too much away. It can be too literal, and some documentary filmmaking can feel too on the nose. I think because documentary filmmaking involves all of this, you know, like it involves a lot of equipment and it involves a lot of theatre around it and a lot of process around it. Whereas I think audio can feel different because it's you forget that you have a mic in front of you. Firstly, you always feel less guarded. But then I think
so there's no performance either.
I feel like that sometimes when I'm interviewing people, you feel like their guard is down a bit more, and also I think that from the audience perspective, I think that like audio has this way, we as people have this way of understanding the emotion behind people's voices in a much deeper way than we think we do. Do you know what I mean? Like you can just like a pause in somebody's speech, or the way they breathe, or the way they kind of structure their sentences. Like there's so much in the way people speak that we don't realize, and it isn't just speaking. You know when someone's reading a script. How? I don't know how, but you can just tell. You can tell so much about, you know, if somebody's telling you a story, and you can tell where the emotional parts of that story are by the way they break in between the sentences, or just by the way they're breathing. And I think that's like so like awesome about audio. That's what I love about it. It's like super emotionally charged, you know, much more than we think it is.
Definitely. I promise we're going back to the introduction and growing up in Dubai, but it seems like this one is only expanding. One last point. I keep lying about this last point. To what you just said, it's been like so much eye-opening this past season. I produced the first 10 episodes of my podcast, Damiri Podcast, in terms of how open-minded people could be as listeners. I've had a few sort of highly contested episodes that people completely oppose a particular character because their views on a subject matter. Especially in the context of Libya, currently a lot is happening, very, very emotionally fueling events, and people have very polarized opinions about things. But the feedback has been after they listen to the episodes. Even people who are like, I completely oppose this, I don't want to even listen to the guy, I don't want to even listen to her, blah, blah, blah. And then a few days pass on, and in the same sense, because my episodes are long, they somehow, some way changed their mind and end up giving it a go.
Yeah.
The most interesting feedback is, I completely disagree with this person on 1, 2, 3, but I completely connect and I enjoyed this podcast episode so much and I've learned so much. To me, that's so mind-boggling. Totally. And it's almost like the goal in the sense like, do not, you don't have to buy into everything presented to you, but you can pick and choose the ones that you resonate with and give it that kind of openness. And in a way, I think it's what you said in terms of sound allows you to feel. Allows allows the listener to put themselves in the shoes of the conversation. And a lot of the times people say, oh, I feel like I'm sitting with you as I'm driving, or I feel like you guys are in the back of the car. So there is that intimacy.
Totally. I think it also, like, just because it gives you more space as well, like there's more space to tell stories. Your episodes are upwards of an hour, but people listen to the whole thing. Joe Rogan, his podcast is like 3 hours long, and people listen to the whole thing. Like, I think there is space to let people get their points across in a way where they can do it on their own terms. Do you know what I mean? And we often deal with tricky characters on Kerning cultures where we don't like them as people all the time. But at least it gives them the space to get their point across, and like, who are we to judge whether or not somebody's decision making was right or wrong because it's specific to a time or a place and whatever. And I do think that that's what audio is really cool about. Like, there's a lot of space to get like nuance of character out, which you can't do in a documentary that has to stick to a certain time limit to keep people's attention, or in a written piece that has to be under a certain word count. I don't know. To me, there's something cool about it, and that's like, I get that a lot listening as well. Like, my favorite kind of podcasts are not the ones where I agree with everything and I know the story and I love the person I'm listening to and all of their views are the same as mine. I probably listen to way too much content like that, but there are some stories like that I've listened to, and you're like, this person's like horrific, but this is a new type of person that I didn't know about their thought process before. This is maybe a clumsy example, but there's a podcast called Love and Radio. I don't know if you listen to it, and they do these kind of long form character studies. And there's an episode called The Red Dot. Have you listened to that one?
I need to write it down. No.
It's basically about a sex offender. It's about a paedophile, and they got a lot of like flack for it because, they gave a paedophile a platform, that's very debatable in media as to whether or not that's a right thing to do. But like, listening to it, like, I don't know, maybe it's because I don't know if this is like, if it's a bit perverse to enjoy listening to that kind of thing, but like hearing someone like that's thought process, not that you can condone or in any way sympathize with their actions, but like, it's interesting.
It makes you a bit more informed of how they think and what happens.
Not that I think in any way that we should be sympathizing with pedophiles, but
no, in terms of understanding the world around us, not necessarily like, I know why you did this. No, it's like, okay, these elements take you to that place. Totally, essentially. But
and I don't think that would have come across in a documentary video. Definitely. He would have like it. I don't know. There's something about audio that medium works.
I think having a camera on your face, which we're doing now, one on your face, one on mine.
I'm kind of forgetting about it,
but in a good way, because we're exactly looking at each other. It's a different setup. But when it comes to documentary, you feel like you got to perform. You feel like somehow you're being judged, and at the same time, as an audience, you feel like the spotlight is on this person, especially if they're profiled to be a bad person. Pausing all that and going back to Dubai, you can go a particular year, particular moment. It's infamous for their very daunting hot summers. Maybe that's not the interesting time of year for you, but like,
I didn't spend any time there in the summers because I finished school in June May or something.
It's amazing. So you get the best of both worlds.
And then my dad would stay in Dubai and work over the summer.
Okay.
Bless him. And my mum would take me and my sister back to the UK and we'd stay with family. So like, I didn't really know what like Dubai summer was until I moved there as an adult, and I was like, this is what people were talking about.
That's good. It's a good way of splitting the universe.
But then I also thought the UK was this like beautiful, warm place, and I had no idea how bad it gets, because we haven't spent any time there in the winter.
So your parents engineered your perception of those worlds very nicely.
Yeah, it's
but if you pick a day from your childhood memories, just to paint a picture of how that was like, activities, family gatherings, social, education. Yeah. What was Dubai like for Alex?
I mean, we lived in up until my memories of Dubai are, before it really hit the boom years. I would consider the boom years of Dubai like 2000 and maybe 3 or 4 onwards. I think those, and then to 2009. We left in 2005 or 2006. So my kind of early memories of Dubai are, we lived in Jumeirah, which is a kind of low-rise neighborhood. We lived like a 5-minute walk to the beach, and we and my school was just down the road, and so we lived this kind of it was like a quiet life, which is weird to say because Dubai is the opposite of a quiet life now, but we did live like a very quiet life. Weekends camping on the beach or camping in the desert or just spending the day at the beach or having barbecues in the back garden, and it was I think that's what my parents liked about it. It was a very quiet life. It was very.
Is it because of that timing, or is it because your parents managed to carve a certain bubble?
No, I think it was that time in Dubai. I don't think it was known as the place where you can move to as a foreigner and make a lot of money and live in a nice expensive high rise and stuff. Like, it was still like you got hardship pay up until the early 2000s to live in Dubai, because it was considered a remote place that you wouldn't necessarily want to move to. But I think that suited a lot of people just fine, and especially the old set of foreigners that lived there. I think a lot of them, they lived there for that reason, that it was quiet and it was some way remote. And I think a lot of people there were trying to escape from something back home. Like, my parents for sure didn't have any interest in living in the UK during that time, I think, because my dad, he's not going to go back and live in Shirebrook. Like, what's he going to do there, They don't have an airport. He's not going to work at the airport. My mum, the same. My mum was from a really not great upbringing in London, and so she left as soon as she could and didn't speak to her parents for a long time. And so they both just didn't want to be in the UK, and so Dubai was a nice haven for them, I think.
They met in a very interesting environment, right? They're not in the same field, but they're in the same environment. Well,
same friendship groups, and they met through mutual friends, and they were put on a blind date. And my mum hated my dad. she thought he was an awful person because he. I think when my dad gets nervous, he has a tendency to kind of show off a little bit, and so he bought. My mum always tells this story where they sat down for lunch and he bought a bottle of champagne, and they were just at this like hotel restaurant, and she was like, is he trying to, why is he buying a bottle of champagne? Like, I'm so not impressed by this. And she also thought he was German because he's so not talkative. And he looks, he's got the same features as me, like blonde hair and stuff. So she thought he was German up until the end of their first date because he said so little. But then somehow, I don't know, somehow it worked out. He
turned it around.
Yeah, somehow. Pretty impressive turnaround. But yeah.
But so for you, it's a really nice, relaxed environment where there's, I wouldn't say nature, but there's relaxation, open space, beach, barbecues, good friendship. Very consistent, and at the same time, it's not Dubai where people circulating every 2 years, going back and forth. You had friendships.
People were there for the long haul, really.
Yeah. Did you have friendship with locals as well?
No, that's the weird thing. I wasn't friends with any Emiratis until I left school, until I was an adult, because there were
none in school?
No Emiratis in my school. No.
Oh, okay.
We had a lot of English, American, Pakistani, Indian.
What kind of school was it?
It was a British curriculum school. Okay. Other Arabs from Syria, Lebanon, whatever. But
so 100% expats from all over.
I would say my school was 100% expats. Maybe there were a couple of Emiratis. I didn't know them though in school. So I didn't make friends with any Emiratis until I went back to Dubai to work when I was 20 or 21.
But how do you make a sense of that place? Because I have nephews
Yeah.
who live there at a very early age. Like we're
Yeah.
talking your childhood age now, 8 and 7.
Yeah.
And it's exactly that. International school, people from all over the world. I don't 100% know, but I'm assuming 80% of their network is that.
Yeah.
It's people who are from the outside.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
how does that shape your view of the land and the country and the
Yeah,
culture?
I think-
or is that something that's not really in the mindset yet?
Well, I think it's like, I think if you'd have, I don't think I considered the UAE to be, it sounds really weird. I knew that geographically it was in the Middle East, but I didn't consider my upbringing to have, I didn't consider that I was brought up in an Arab country until I was older, because I just, like, you know, Arab history, Middle East history, Emirati history was kind of at the peripheries of our life as a foreign family. You know, I went to a British school, we learned British curriculum. It was a bubble, total bubble. And so I only really got interested in the history of the UAE when I moved back there as an adult. And so as a kid, I mean, like, I probably didn't have that different of a life, to growing up in the UK, like aside from, you know, being able to like play football every weekend in the, you know, because it was sunny, and like, you know, being, I don't know, I don't think it was, I think they create, like, the British curriculum school system created a bubble for me and for my classmates.
It's very busy, very full on.
Yeah, and all my teachers were British, basically. Like, it's very, you get the sense that you're living in a, I think I had the sense growing up that I knew that I didn't live in the UK, but like, I didn't have the sense that I grew up in the Middle East either. I don't speak Arabic now.
I mean,
I didn't learn Arabic growing up.
For me, it's a sense of exploration of a place, not necessarily being critical at all, because I had a similar experience of living out of homeland, essentially. I was born in the US very early on, went back to Libya too. My primary education, elementary, is in Libya. The later stage, 12 to 18, was in Morocco. Yeah. But in a Libyan school. So sort of parallel to you, Dubai, British school. Yeah. But the curriculum wasn't so busy. So at 1 p.m., it's all over. And there's not much extra to do. So, you know, I'm out in the streets mixing with Moroccans to the level that I perfected the dialect after 2 years. They wouldn't necessarily tell that I wasn't from there. Right. The ones that are very skeptical, especially like Morocco, like any typical markets all over Arab world, you have to haggle for pricing. Yeah, yeah. And whenever visitors come in, I'm like, don't speak a word. Let me handle this. And I'll go haggling back and forth, and they'll get curious because one of us looks different to the other. And they're like, so where are you guys from? And I'm like, I'm from here. It's like, you just, and then they're like, yeah, I can tell you're from here. But what about the other guys? Like, I'm like, he's Libyan. Myself as well. And they're like, no way. And the ones that will be skeptical, they're like, oh, maybe, but you have a Berber origin from Amazigh, this kind of ethnicity. And they mix it back and forth, but visually they might suspect, but language wise, because I spent so much time with them. Yeah. But because it's possible. Yeah. It's there. Well, that's because I'm in the neighborhood. Yeah. But in your sense, it wasn't an option.
Like, you're not gonna. Yeah. You live in Morocco. You're not gonna have a social life if you don't interact with Moroccans, right? Yeah. The UAE, like, I think what is it, like 15% of the population are Emirati? Yeah. Maybe less. Yeah. And so you can totally go. Yeah. So your life
from a numbers game, it's not an option, basically.
Yeah, but also like you kind of don't. You're not forced to. Like when I moved to Beirut, I was forced to pick up. I was forced to pick up basic Arabic and forced to learn to. Don't know, just forced to, like, you know, most people are Lebanese, obviously, so you kind of assimilate much quicker because you just, like, you have to, otherwise you're not going to leave your apartment.
You'd be completely isolated.
So but that doesn't happen in the UAE. Like you can literally live. You know, I'm sure I know plenty of people that have lived there for years and years and have never had a meaningful conversation with somebody from the UAE.
It's a very interesting place, definitely. Like, it's by design. It feels like it is. That gives you that openness.
I mean, that's always been the history of the UAE the modern history of the UAE. You know, it's always been a place that has been very open to foreigners and to people coming in and building it literally.
So to compare it at the same time to jumpstart where you are today, you're here in the UK, we're in London at the moment. Your parents consciously wanted you to connect to the homeland, culture, and also give you a reference of another reality, the real world, whichever one you want to choose,
quote unquote the real world.
Of like things work differently somewhere else, and they, along with every summer, you were shipped off after university to come here, or like earlier than that?
It was I wasn't even like I was shipped off. It was literally my parents it got to 2006, and Dubai, those were really good days for Dubai, especially for, that was after they passed the law that foreigners could buy property. So a lot of my parents' friends were buying their houses for very, like, really cheap for what they're worth now. But my parents didn't want to risk, they didn't have the savings to do that. They didn't want to like risk buying a house and then finding it was worth nothing. So they had this kind of decision of like, either we go all in and stay in the UAE, or we don't and we leave. And I think a big part of that decision making was they didn't want to raise me and my sister, and my brother by that point. He was born in 2000. They didn't want to raise us in a outside of, in a bubble. Essentially, they didn't want to raise us in that bubble that I was just talking about, because
they wanted to shock your system.
Because what comes with that bubble is a lot of like just privilege and a lot of not a very good understanding of the rest of the world, of where you come from. And my dad especially, well, both my parents, they're both from pretty like not easy backgrounds, and so they didn't want to raise us to
take things for granted.
They didn't want to raise us to take things for granted and to be entitled or anything like that. And I think at the time it was the worst move they could possibly have done, because I loved my friends and my life, and it's that age. I was 13, so I was just I don't want to go to the UK. The UK sucks. So they moved us back, and
plus it's difficult. Even if it was something else that's even better, it's a tough transition at that age, because that's your world.
Yeah, totally. And I hated my parents for doing that to me. And I hated living in the UK for the first year or two. But they moved us back. And we moved back to a relatively normal town just outside Bristol called Chepstow. Went to a state school and lived in a relatively normal town.
And your parents moved with you?
Yeah. We all moved back, the whole family. And my dad got a job in the UK and all that. So, and it was a huge shock to my system, but it was a needed shock, because I'm super grateful they did it, because like now, I'm friends with I'm still friends with a bunch of people that I grew up with going to school, and they grew up in Dubai their whole life. They didn't leave. And they're just like, they don't have like a very good, and I'm talking very specifically about people who were raised in the British curriculum, British like expat quote unquote bubble in the UAE.
And they're still there.
They're still there. A lot of them work in marketing or finance or, something like that now. And a lot of them, they just don't like, I'm sure they'd admit it themselves, they don't have a good idea of, like, I was talking to a friend recently, a year ago in the UAE, and he was like, dude, I come back to the UK now, and I don't know how to get on a bus. Like, I don't even know what clothes I'm supposed to wear in winter. Like, I don't know how to use the underground. Just, and it's like unbelievably naive stuff.
Yeah.
Where I'm just like, dude, that like is so sad. Like and I don't blame people for that. Like, it's a very, if you're earning good money in the UAE, like it's a fine life to have. But I can see why it's easy to stay in that bubble. But I'm glad my parents forced us out of it.
I think I sympathize a bit with the dressing situation, but there's
takes a bit to get used to. Yeah.
There's a story that I want you to share if you're interested. But like on the dressing up situation, it's very hard to have a reference of what's standard to wear for this range of temperature. And people struggle with it. Like when they see us wearing a bit lightly. Relatives and parents sometimes panic. It's like, oh, dress up, scarf and sit. I'm like, no, that real winter hasn't happened yet. I got clothes for the period. So the reference is off because it's a different environment. But I think more on friends experiencing similar things differently. I think you remember you mentioned when we first met a story about a friend in Starbucks, of his expectation.
Yeah, that was a big thing. Oh yeah, that's another big cultural thing, was like, so this was actually the same guy, probably the same conversation.
I'm panicking if he's listening. I hope this is just an example. Don't worry, he won't be listening.
But he I think probably part of the same conversation or another one along the same lines. He was like, I find it weird coming back to the UK and just going into a Starbucks and the person behind the till is British. Like he's like, I get all awkward. I don't know like how to talk to them. Like it's weird. And I mean, the reason for that is because most people who work in the service industry in the UAE are from the Philippines, and that's, I mean, of course there are outliers from that, but generally that's like what he's used to. And so he was just tripped out coming back, and people in Starbucks are British and whatever, and that, I mean, there's a whole complex mishmash of weird psychology there. I don't know why you would feel uncomfortable about that, but yeah, that's the kind of thing that it can produce in people if you if you don't know anything except the UAE, except Dubai.
It's not 100% symptomatic of the UAE. It's symptomatic of having never left your environment for so long to experience another reality and accept that things might work differently. And things might even change in the environment that you're living in. And it's, you mentioned like the whole time we're talking about two different Dubais. Your parents' initial experience and then what happened afterwards. And that happened to you as well. So you had a long stretch here studying. You went to uni here to do...
I went to Falmouth to do... the course is called Press and Editorial Photography. It was basically photojournalism.
Nice.
So I moved back here in 2006, went to high school and sixth form here.
Is that inspired by your dad taking up photography?
I don't think so. No, so I think it was... my dad was a photographer in some sense of the word, but a very loose sense of the word. He had a camera that he used, and he took pretty good photos, but he wasn't like a professional or anything like that. But I got into photography. We went on a family holiday to LA when I was about, I want to say I was about 14 or 13. And my mum thought I might be interested in going to the Getty Museum, which is a big, at the time they had a big photojournalism exhibition. And me and my mum went to that, and it completely blew me away. It was a big retrospective of, all of the greats, like Henri Cartier-Bresson, like Brassai, like James Natchway, like every photographer of note from the last 100 years was in this exhibition. It took over the whole gallery. And that was, I remember that being the moment for me where I was like, oh, so you can use photography in a way that like means something, and you can like tell stories with photography. And I remember, I mean, there's a whole, we can talk about this later, there's a whole kind of other set of complexity that comes with this, but my very naive 13-year-old brain, there was a big wall-to-wall, like as long as the living room here, so a good like 20 feet long spread of James Natchway's photos, and they were all intense close-up black and white photos of an operating theatre in an American air base in Afghanistan. And they were super intense. It was, like people undergoing surgery, literally. So, and I remember looking at that and being like, oh my God, like this is, I don't know what this is making me feel, but this is like crazy that you can do this with photography. And so I think from that moment I was like, this is kind of, I mean, we can talk later on about the idea of being a conflict photographer and a war photographer, but
that's on the list,
quote unquote, but that was the moment, at least when I realized that you can use photography to tell stories, and it can mean something, and it can be that powerful. So that was when I took up photography after that.
What was the first sort of set of photos and first camera
on that holiday? I used and I think I had my dad's old film camera, and I did a little series of landscapes about around Malibu Beach, there were a bunch of old, dilapidated houses,
Yes.
which didn't match my expectations of Malibu. And so I had this very sort of basic, naive idea of doing a series of landscapes about abandoned houses in Malibu. So I did that on my family holiday.
That's amazing.
And they're really bad. Like, they're really bad photos, but like, it was
no, but your instinct of like,
yeah,
everyone's focused here, but there's a story
yeah, that
right
was
there.
yeah,
I think
very basic, on a very basic level. That was my instinct, I
but
guess.
that's the reality of how most interesting stories are. Like, it's where it's sort of the path of
True.
least.
I mean, I wouldn't give myself that much credit at 13 years old. I think I was just whatever. But
I would like instincts that strong are not to be dismissed.
Yeah,
to be honest.
really.
But like on that point that you keep bringing of this whole celebration of certain types of photographers on your course.
Yeah.
I think a lot of them used to come and talk and discuss their experiences.
Yeah.
Not by virtue of how they're speaking about it, by virtue of how maybe the program celebrated the idea of someone going out there to the world to just, take it apart and explain to the rest of us of how things went down.
Yeah.
I can say it in much more basic words, but I'll leave it
I know what you're
at
saying,
that with that opener.
Yeah.
And that might have been exciting for you at the time, but now you feel a bit different. The sort of like, in another way, outsiders looking into a different country, trying to explain a situation to people here or, the Western world, whatever label we can stick on that.
I have a lot of feelings about all of this, and I think this is what I spend the majority of my time thinking about with my work, because I'm from the UK, and a lot of the last few years of my work has been in Lebanon and in the UAE. So I've always been, the majority of my work is from an outsider's perspective. So
I'd say insider, outsider. It's much more complicated than that.
I could call myself more of an insider if I spoke fluent Arabic. I think that's, for me, that's the big thing where I don't feel like enough of an insider because I can't do interviews in Arabic.
But it's as you have a step plus than someone who's just
sure,
back today to go explore.
I mean, like we mentioned, I still was brought up in geographically in the Middle East, but in a bubble within the Middle East. So I don't really consider myself to have any sort of special insider knowledge to the Middle East, and I kind of doubt people that do as well. I mean, aside from people who are very, very experienced correspondents who have lived in a place for an extremely long time, I'm a bit skeptical about people who are Middle East, quote unquote, Middle East experts, because there's a whole other thing with that. But I mean, like you were saying, the course I went on in Falmouth was it was a photojournalism course that focused very heavily on the classics of photojournalism. So Robert Capa, Henri Cartier-Bresson. I mean, I'm naming people that maybe are not familiar to non-photographers, but these are people who were known for their covering wars and covering conflicts and covering other countries.
I'll probably know the generation after, like Guy Martin.
Guy Martin was so Guy was one of my tutors at uni. Christopher. Christopher. Sorry, I keep forgetting his name.
Christopher Brown.
Yeah. Tim Hetherington, and so my course was a very much a photojournalism focused course that spent a lot of time, and I think it's changing now, but I think it spent a lot of time celebrating white men who worked in countries that were undergoing conflict. And at the time that was the Middle East, because this was 2011, 2012. So it was
the height of
everyone
that.
was covering Egypt and Libya and then Tunisia so I went into my course and keep in mind that I had this feeling that was the way to become a legitimate established photographer, was to go and do this kind of old school style National Geographic-esque, foreigner parachuted into a country, telling the rest of the world the truth of what's happening on the ground. That was the very naive idea I had of this is how you become respected and successful photographer or journalist or anything, because those are the people that I was looking up to, that I was kind of funneled into looking up to. And I don't blame the course. It's how the photojournalism industry is in general. It celebrates. It's changing again. I keep saying that, but I think it is starting to change. But I think it traditionally has always celebrated this idea of the foreigner who's willing to put themselves at personal danger to get the story or to get the picture. And I try and say this without criticizing the photographers themselves, because I have an enormous amount of respect for people who can do that, and people who can, people who are willing to do that and put them, I have so much respect for those photographers. And I went to university thinking that I wanted to be that photographer, because there was also, let's be real, there's also some weird masculinity complex about it. And I felt I had that as well, where, okay, I want to be a photographer.
There's a rush. There's a rush. There's an excitement.
Yeah, and this is the only way I can be a photographer in a way that's masculine, and I can feel like I'm manly and I'm doing something worthwhile for the world. And so I definitely went into university with that idea that I wanted to do that. It's so naive, and then I guess, I don't really know. I guess I know what changed is that I had Guy Martin for a tutor. Guy Martin, wonderful man, wonderful photographer, who was he was severely injured in a mortar attack in Libya.
The same one that killed
Tim Hetherington and
injured
Chris
Honduras. Injured Christopher Brown as well. They're all together in Misrata specifically.
So that story was super present in my first year of university, because Guy had just, he was back from Libya and he'd recovered, but he was our tutor.
Just a little caveat, actually, the last season's ending episode was with Osama Al-Fituri, who was their fixer. He was with them. So he witnessed first account of how they were working in a different form and how each of them had their own sort of instinct. So it's an interesting one. I might translate. It's in Arabic, so there might be a lot of references to the journalists that worked in that time, because Osama dealt with a lot of their key moments there. But it's very interesting that you have the fresh. I don't know how far off, because I know it really played a massive toll on Guy's mental state of mind.
He talks about it a lot in interviews, and he talks about it a lot in our course as well. No, actually, that's probably not right. He didn't talk about it a lot, but it was something that was always at the surface of our understanding of him, and
it shaped his experience.
It shaped. I think a lot of the young men who started that course, there were quite a lot of young men on that course, had this again. Maybe they had this idea that they wanted to work as conflict photographers, whatever that term really means. That's kind of a outdated term anyways. But I think having Guy, having him as a tutor, kind of gave us a much better understanding of what that actually means to be a conflict photographer. And Guy talks about this a lot, and he has a lot of fascinating interviews where he talks about how he feels as though photography was using him and he wasn't using photography at that point, and he was and his relationship with photography was misbalanced. And so I think I took a lot from that, having him as a tutor in the first year of university. And it just made me think a lot about, if this is a career path that I want to pursue, what's the toll that my family has to take for that? I don't want to be someone that puts my family in the situation where they're worrying about the work that I do, And do I even want to do that? Is it even worth the stories that I want to tell and the kind of documentaries and whatever that I want to produce? Do I is that really what I want to do, or is it because I have this kind of deep rooted kind of respect for and admiration for the classic war photographers and conflict photographers.
Can we classically introduce Kerning cultures?
Yeah.
Also, the meaning of the word, because I lack sort of my Webster knowledge is very basic. So where the name comes from as a brand, and at the same time, the focus, the stories, and how people are perceiving it. Since you started, which is how many years ago?
I started being involved with KC about 4 years ago, 2016, and Hibba started it a year before that, I think, or late 2015 maybe.
Perfect.
So, so Kerning Cultures, it started out as a single podcast, English language radio documentaries about the Middle East broadly. That was kind of Hibba's mission statement when she started it, and then that was going for about a year or so on its own as a single show. And then we got accepted, or Hibba and Razan, who's the co-founder, got accepted into an incubator in San Francisco called Matter, which is a media incubator. They help media startups, and they got some funding with that. And when they were there was this idea of like, well, why is it just a single podcast? Why don't you turn it into a network? And so after that, Hibba kind of started with this more ambitious idea of turning Kerning Cultures from a single podcast to a whole network. And so she started this kind of journey of pitching investors and raising money and all of that kind of thing, which took about, I think, a year maybe. That's
a massive accomplishment.
It's a massive accomplishment, yeah. And I can't claim any credit for it. Like it was almost single-handedly Hibba. And so in March 2019, I want to say, we finished that round of funding and announced, and so that was us as the first the first venture-backed podcast network in the Middle East, essentially. So the kind of, Gimlet Media, kind of a similar approach where instead of one show, we wanted to make a whole host of shows, and now that's becoming a reality. We've released Jesudi in the last 2 months, I think. Yes. Our first Arabic language show. Yeah,
a very lovely show that I'm promoting. We're cross-promoting each other because it really fits the idea of exploring yourself, self-awareness, and living better. And it's very concise, very well done, really nicely fit. Yeah. And it also, the way it organically features a variety of voices and stories, also a variety of dialects. Yeah. They blend in so well for someone like me.
I mean, I wish I could listen to it and fully understand it, do you know? I hope one day I'll get there.
Don't worry. Take my word. Take my word for it. It's good.
Yeah. Okay. And then we have El Empire, which is our other English language show, and then we're releasing another few shows in the next few months. So that now it's a network. So now Kerning Cultures means the network, essentially. Mm-hmm. We still do the English language show, which is called Kerning Cultures. That's like our flagship show, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah. That's the one
that's the one I work on.
You work on. Okay.
That's Kerning Cultures. I hope I've explained it. I feel like it's a bit easier to listen to it and then understand it, but that sort of gets to the point of it. But the name, you asked about the name. So Kerning is a graphic design term that basically means the space between letters. And so if you're a graphic designer and you're designing a logo for something, you can widen the kerning, or it means the kind of spaces in between the letters, and different kerning looks
stuck together or like very spread out.
And so the name Kerning Cultures is a metaphor for the space between cultures, bringing cultures together, that kind of thing. I think it works when you explain it, but if you don't know graphic design, it probably doesn't make an awful lot of sense.
So how wide is your kerning?
Well, I think it's pretty. I mean, I love the stories that we do that bring different countries and cultures and time periods together. So one of my favorite stories we did was about this young guy from Yemen called Faraj, and his parents are Yemeni. His dad is Yemeni, his mum's Vietnamese, and we told the story in 2 episodes of his family's migration from Vietnam at the end of the war in the 60s to Yemen, and then when the conflicts in Yemen started, Faraj moved to the US, and so we kind of told this big arcing story about history, but about family dynamics and about migration. Each other.
So you're in a way, geography is relevant, but it's not restricting to you.
Yeah.
Stories could be about anything,
kind
really.
of. I mean, our main criteria is that don't really have a criteria, but it's kind of the story has to take place somewhere in the Middle East, and if it doesn't, the lead character has to be from the Middle East, essentially.
Yeah.
That's not always the case, but that's the vague remit upon which we work.
That's good. It's good obstruction. So it's not massive, but it kind of sets you to start from a certain base. As far as you know, who's listening? Who's the audience?
So I think our top download countries are the US is our biggest one by far, and we think that's mostly diaspora, and then maybe a percentage of people from the US who are interested in the Middle East. And then our second biggest is Saudi Arabia, and then somewhere, I think the UAE, Lebanon is somewhere third. So that's kind of our listenership. So that's for our English show. For our Arabic show, I think Saudi is our biggest audience.
Is there
the others, but the others is all in the Middle East for the Arabic shows.
Is there a thing with Saudi and podcast, or is it what's the connection there?
Well, I mean, I think Saudi is is a huge podcast market. It seems to be, at least. I mean, it seems to be there's a huge potential listenership, mostly for Arabic content, I think.
Yeah, I know there's a few platforms as well.
Mustafa and a few others, but
I think there's good networks. Yeah, but at the same time, in terms of listening culture, because I know they have a massive online content, YouTube culture that's been going on for years,
and I think podcasting takes a
successful.
slice of that. I think that audience who are extremely YouTube fluent and like young, and I think that does translate over to podcasting, where it is starting to in a.
Does it have to do with good highways and driving cultures?
Because it's US, it's a big thing. Like it's actually true. I mean, I think the UAE has the longest commute times of anywhere in the world.
UAE,
or at least in the Middle East. There's a statistic somewhere that we found.
But like, where would you go from Dubai to where? Like, is
Abu
it
Dhabi to Dubai. Yeah,
I
think a lot of people do that commute. But
I imagine Saudi Arabia, it's much bigger. Also, traffic jams.
So there's a lot of potential, for people listening to long form stuff, because they have an hour or 2 hours commuting every day.
Yeah, I keep trying to imagine, because I asked this to the listeners frequently. It's awkward saying my listeners. I feel like I possess them. I'm just the listeners. You guys are free. And a lot of people send me like snippets of video as they're driving. They're like, "Oh, I love this so much, even though the traffic is shit and I'm stuck in it. But like my mind is somewhere else." Yeah. So I think there's something. We can't say we can crack it here for the UK, because you'll be listening to
the UK has its own thing. Like more people walk and go on trains in the UK. So I mean, I listen to most podcasts while I'm walking to work. It takes about 20 minutes. So
I try to squeeze mine on one side of headphones as I bike. It's crazy dangerous. It's ridiculous.
That is a high intensity listening experience.
I should. This is a confession. I shouldn't be saying this. Anything else you want to add? I'm done.
Dude, no, thanks so much. I feel like I was actually pretty nervous when I came in, because this is the first time I've been on a podcast that isn't Kerning Cultures. But Kerning Cultures, I know, like, it's, do you know what I mean? Like, I know the story and I know the script and I've written it, and it's usually my thing. But this is the first time I've done an interview for a podcast that's not Casey. So it's been fun, and I think you do a great job of what I always try to do, which is create a space where the person can talk openly, and it's a great space for it. So I think I've had a lot of fun. I've learned about what it's like to be on this side of the microphone. So thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. Maybe one day I'll be on the other side.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Thanks a lot, Alex.
Thanks, man.
Appreciate it.
You too.